I'm Michael Parkinson, and I have the privilege of chairing this evening's lecture on behalf of the Heseltine Institute, and in particular of its co-directors, Sue Jarvis and Professor Catherine de Roz, who are with us. Before I formally open the evening, let me just do some housekeeping. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening, so if you do hear one, please proceed calmly with the ushers to the exit doors, which are clearly marked. Secondly, please, no recording or photography during the session. Thirdly, however, the event will be recorded and will be made public in due course. Fourthly, please do use social media, #StateTheNation, to tweet throughout all this very exciting stuff. And just remind you, at the end of the evening, you are guests at a reception in the atrium outside. Before I go on to the theme of our evening, I think I would like to introduce to the stage to offer a formal welcome on behalf of the University of Liverpool and the Heseltine Institute, the Pro-Vice Chancellor for the Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Fiona Beveridge. Fiona.
Thank you, Michael. Welcome to the University of Liverpool and tonight's Heseltine Institute lecture. The Heseltine Institute brings together academics and policymakers, national and regional leaders, civic leaders, to think about the policies and policy making for tomorrow's cities. All of us have an interest in the development of safe, inclusive and sustainable cities in what is an increasingly fractured world. And the Heseltine Institute seeks to bring expertise, capacity and thought leadership to this pressing challenge. During the COVID-19 pandemic, policymakers and city leaders alike were particularly challenged, navigating uncharted waters with often very little experience of the issues that we faced. The situation required us to mute our ideals about evidence-led policy in favour of unedited sharing of collective insight, the pooling of ideas and rapid exchange of learning. The Heseltine Institute stepped up to this challenge with its COVID-19 policy briefs, facilitating that rapid exchange of knowledge and ideas between organisations and practitioners across a wide range of policy areas, and I'm aware that many people in this room contributed to those. Series 2 took this approach forward into the post-pandemic recovery effort, and we continue to encourage this dissemination of practically focused, practitioner-led insight in the new third series. The Heseltine Institute is involved more broadly in an array of local, regional and national initiatives, bringing robust research practices and know-how to a wide range of urban and neighbourhood challenges. Our co-directors, Sue Jarvis and Professor Catherine de Roz, are both here tonight and will be delighted to share more about the Heseltine Institute's work afterwards or through email contact. So we're delighted to host tonight's lecture here in the Tung Auditorium, part of the new Yoko Lennon Centre. This high specification venue, which opened earlier this year, provides Liverpool with an exceptional new space to listen to live music. Designed by local architects Ellis Williams, with cutting-edge acoustic specification from Arup, this is proving to be a remarkable space for solo, chamber, choral and orchestral performances. It has adjustable acoustics, so it can also accommodate a wide variety of jazz, folk, pop, electroacoustic and experimental music. Indeed, we have already a wide and varied programme of events, and you can pick up a brochure in the foyer to find out more and sign up to receive regular news about forthcoming events. It's also a teaching space where, besides performing, students can be very hands-on in sound production and recording, programme planning, event management and music technology. This facility adds significantly to our teaching estate, but it's also an important new venue in a city where cultural regeneration is such a success story. So welcome again from me. I hope you'll come back again to sample some of the delights on offer in this exceptional venue. But for now, let me hand back to Professor Michael Parkinson to introduce this evening's lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona, for that welcome. I must say this is an extraordinary occasion. We've got virtually a full house of colleagues drawn from all sectors of Liverpool City region life: local government, business, education, churches, developers, architects, housing, health, voluntary, charity, football clubs, cultural organisations. This is really Liverpool royalty. When we began to plan this event 6 months ago, and I must pay homage to John Flamson, whose idea it was, we had no idea then how appropriate this title would be. But it's obvious the continuing challenges of Brexit, COVID, war in Europe, a climate emergency, an energy crisis, a cost of living crisis, a looming recession, combined with turbulence, not to say chaos, at the heart of national government, with a crucial autumn financial statement due in 2 days' time, I think makes the theme of our lecture this evening extraordinarily compelling. And that's one reason it has attracted such a large audience. But in addition, such dangerous times as these underline the need for leadership and vision, and I think we might agree both have been remarkably lacking in our national life in recent times. And I know that is a crucial reason for the size and seniority of the audience here today. It is to listen to someone who throughout his career has consistently given such leadership and vision. That is our distinguished speaker, Lord Michael Heseltine. Michael's been a major figure in public life in this country for 7 decades, a successful businessman with a huge, successful publishing empire, a great city builder. Virtually any initiative which changed the face of our cities, he did. Development Corporation, City Challenge, elected mayors, devolution city regions, he did them all. He played a major part in the renaissance of the city from the 80s and onwards, and was made in return for his contribution a freeman of the city, and gave his name to our institute. Lord Heseltine has held many of the great offices of state, including defence, trade and industry, environment, and of course, Deputy Prime Minister. I suspect a number of us in the audience would probably share the recent judgment of his former cabinet colleague, Lord Clark, Michael Heseltine, the best Prime Minister the country never had. He is eloquently addressed and continues to address all the major issues facing this country. There could be no better person to speak to us this evening. After his lecture, we will continue our conversation, a chance with colleagues in the audience to contribute. But now, to deliver his lecture, The State of the Nation, a Personal Perspective, can I ask you to welcome to the stage Lord Michael Heseltine.
A short time ago, I argued that if Boris goes, Brexit goes. Johnson was not alone in souring our relationship with Europe. The Atlanticist prejudices of Rupert Murdoch and Conrad Black, using a power over our media that would never be granted to foreigners in other countries. The populism of Nigel Farage and Paul Dacre's nationalistic editorship of the Daily Mail all contributed to the propagandist exploitation of the consequences that flowed from the implementation of the European single market. The harmonization of the rules and regulations that governed European economies was one of Margaret Thatcher's greatest achievements. To introduce the European regulation in place of 28 involved a constant flow of forms. The blame game began. Boris Johnson led the charge to get Brexit done. Well, not quite. Brexit was never going to get done. Brexit was based on an undeliverable set of policies. Get our country back, new trade deals, bonfire of controls, end of wealth-destroying regulations, immigration controls, no border in Ireland. Well, that was 2016. 4 prime ministers, 4 trade secretaries, 5 foreign secretaries, 6 chancellors, 6 chief Brexit negotiators, and an oven-ready Brexit later, we can see the worthlessness of those promises. I must be fair. The impact of COVID and Ukraine has seriously prejudiced our living standards and those of the Western world. We hope that the worst of COVID is behind us. The vaccine, developed under the regulatory discipline of the European Medicine Agency, was the first to achieve clinical approval. The agency, which provided hundreds of jobs in London, has now been transferred to Amsterdam because of Brexit. Ukraine enjoys the support of the Western world, and to its credit, we all appear ready to pay a high price for it. However damaging to us now, the effect of COVID and the Russian invasion of Ukraine may be relatively short-term. Brexit is not. It represents a permanent fracture of our relationship with our closest neighbours and our largest market. It has led to queues in the hospitals and GP waiting rooms, disruption to supply lines, increased prices and interest rates. It reduces our attraction as a gateway to one of the world's largest markets and diminishes our ability to influence European decisions over great global challenges. I followed every Conservative Prime Minister, from Winston Churchill up to and including Theresa May, in their support for our membership of Europe. You would expect me to be critical of Brexit, and I am not alone. Recently, the Daily Telegraph put the past 6 years into context. Under the headline, "After 6 years, after 6 wasted years," Alistair Heath summarised the situation as followed. "It has been clear for years that our putrefying economy is in desperate need of shock therapy. Yet instead of addressing its many horrific pathologies, our ruling class, well served by the status quo, has stubbornly blocked radical surgery. The result has been catastrophic. Poland and Slovenia are catching up with us in terms of middle-class lifestyles, and our desperate young can't afford to buy a home." I quoted the first 4 words of the headline. Let me quote the whole headline. "After 6 wasted years, Truss is about to deliver a Brexit that actually works." The consequence of Liz Truss' 7 weeks in office has an eloquence beyond the finest oratory. Let me set out the reality of Brexit. £1 sterling was worth $1.48 US on the 23rd of June 2016, the day of the referendum. The following day, that value plummeted to $1.36. Yesterday, a pound was buying $1.18, and that amounts to a loss of over 20% of the pound's value against the dollar since 2016. The pound has also lost over 12% of its value against the euro, falling from an exchange rate of over 1.30 before the referendum to 1.14 yesterday. The London School of Economics has estimated that Brexit alone, before the effects of the pandemic and the war in Ukraine are accounted for, is responsible for a 6% rise in food prices. Put starkly, Brexit means that more people are unable to pay their mortgage or rent, are having to turn to food banks, or are unable to heat their home. The Resolution Foundation estimates that the average real pay of UK workers will by the end of the decade be £470 lower each year. That's £1,000 for each average couple. Normally, lower exchange rates have an important silver lining in that they make the exports more affordable and increase their volume. But the signs are that, due to Brexit, induced trade barriers and red tape, this did not happen. Post-Brexit, UK exports to the EU fell by 14% in 2021. The Centre for European Reform has estimated that Brexit had, by the end of 2021, reduced trade in goods between the UK and the EU by 13.6% and left UK GDP 5.2% lower than it would have been if UK had stayed in the single market. The CEE puts the Brexit hit to overall investment in the UK economy at 13.6%. The Office for Budget Responsibility concluded that consequent upon the new trading relationship as set out in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that came into effect on the 1st of January 21, British imports and exports would eventually be reduced by 15%. And they further concluded that new trade deals with non-EU countries will not have a material impact on our GDP. Little surprise that the Truss government did not consult them about the consequences of their budget. I doubt if the government were also consulted about the decision to build a new model of the Land Rover Defender in Slovenia. The queues in the health service are of alarming proportions. The European doctors and nurses have gone home. The government is left trawling developing countries to replace them. No one explained that a consequence of Brexit would be that our country, one of the world's richest, would have to attract specialists trained by some of the world's poorest. The OECD in June of this year predicted that in 2023, the UK economic growth at nil would be the slowest in the G20, above only Russia. 3 months later, the dire energy crisis in Germany had a similar effect there. The three major credit agencies crucial to UK's borrowing costs, Moody's, Fitch, and S&P, have this year all downgraded the outlook for the UK from stable to negative. These are the judgments of independent organizations and markets and stand in stark contrast to the propaganda of Brexiteers. It was all too easy to promote a bonfire of red tape and demonize Brussels bureaucrats on a cynical exploitation of people's anxieties and frustrations. Only yesterday, in The Times, Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, a pro-Brexit think tank, wrote, "Nowhere has the failure been so stark as in the strange story of the almost complete absence of a so-called Brexit dividend. The simple truth is that 6 years on, the only significant example of that bonfire has been to allow unlimited bankers' bonuses." Regulation is the difference between civilization and the jungle. We can all enthuse at David Attenborough's brilliant depiction of the red in Tooth and Claw, where the only law is the survival of the fittest. Regulations are the codes and standards that hold modern societies together. And that is why, whenever the government has sought to dilute or lower the standards they uphold, civilized bodies like the National Trust, the Wildfire Trust, and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds protest at the legislative processes involved. The Brexiteers told us that new deals with faster growing markets would more than compensate for lost European trade. 6 years later, all but 3 of those new deals merely replicate those already negotiated by the European Union. A deal with the United States has been scuppered by the government's attempt to unilaterally override the Northern Ireland Protocol. India wants us to reverse our immigration controls as the price of a deal. There are new deals with Australia and New Zealand. The consequences for our farmers are so adverse that even a minister in today's papers who helped negotiate it says the Australian deal is not good for the UK. No wonder that full implementation of those deals is delayed until the late 2030s. I'm helped again once by the Sunday Telegraph. Jeremy Warner, on October the 30th, wrote, "Brexit is irreversible, but we must strengthen economic ties with the EU." Well, I disagree about his irreversible gambit. Public opinion has already moved. In October, an Ipsos Mori poll reported that 51% of people thought that Brexit had damaged the economy, whilst only 22% thought the opposite. Listen, however, to what Warner says about Brexit. He refers to Rishi Sunak's commitment to building an economy that embraces the opportunities of Brexit. And he goes on. He needs to get a move on, and indeed articulate precisely what these opportunities are. For 6 years after Britain voted to leave the European Union, all we've got to show for it so far is political, economic, and financial chaos. From an economic perspective, there has been zero payback, and particularly in the area of international trade and reputation, considerable harm. I don't accept that Brexit is irreversible. The timescale may be unpredictable. The purpose is not. We must start by building bridges. We need a practical compromise over the Irish border that would restore devolved government. We need to end the isolation of our scientists and researchers by rejoining the Horizon European Research and Innovation Programme. We should restore the right of our young people to participate in projects abroad under the European Erasmus Plus programme. In place of a department for exiting the EU, we need a minister with responsibility for enhancing relationships with the EU. That rescue operation could start with a veterinary agreement to reduce checks on food products entering the single market, which would contribute to reducing tension in Northern Ireland. We should attack the restrictions on musicians and other service providers to work for short periods in the EU. Each of the steps I have set out is realistic, and each step draws our self-interests closer together. The EU is still there, next door, with a market of 450 million people. We thrive only by working together. The question remains how to improve the governance of our country. Brexiteers said that Europe would disintegrate into its original nations. The euro was seen as a harbinger of civil war. The question today is whether the United Kingdom itself can survive. Sinn Féin is now the largest party in the Northern Ireland Assembly. The Scots Nats use identical arguments to break up the United Kingdom that underlie the Brexit case. We need radical change in the way we govern this country. Devolution must be based on a meaningful partnership between London and the rest of England. It calls for a practical sharing of power between Edinburgh and Cardiff and the very different parts of Scotland and Wales. I want to set out what I mean. We must end the misrepresentation of the roles of public and private sector. They are integrated and are of crucial support to each other. Some essential services, such as education and health, are provided by both. Some publicly financed programs, such as research grants, lead directly to job creation. Many quangos, such as the Arts Council or the Lottery, are critical to our success in cultural activities and prowess on the sports field. We need to recognize the civil service for the hard-working, dedicated, incorruptible machinery of government that it is. The widespread appointment of political advisors has contributed to public cynicism. Special advisors should bring expertise to public life, not party politics. My relationship with this city was, without doubt, the most rewarding political experience of my life. It taught me that we are over-centralized and that the baronies of Whitehall are specialists in their responsibilities within adequate coordination. My time here opened my eyes to the local consequences. On the backbenches after 1986, I gathered a fuller understanding of other countries' more effective models. In 1968, the Redcliffe Maud report on the structure of local government in England looked at the 1,300 local authorities that had been created when the only means of travel was by foot or horse. His report recommended their replacement by 62 unitary authorities. It was the right judgment, except, of course, in the eyes of those with a stake in the status quo. Peter Walker, I was his deputy, steered an uneasy compromise through the Conservative government to reduce it to some 300 authorities. The Greater London Authority and city councils presided over London and Manchester boroughs with a two-tier structure based on counties and districts elsewhere. This was the ground over which, as Shadow Secretary of State for the Department of the Environment, I led the Conservatives in the municipal elections of 1978. Labour was in trouble in the winter of discontent. Operation Clean Sweep was intended to drive them from power. Only Durham resisted our advance. I'm not proud of my decisions about the local government restructuring for which I was responsible at first in 1979. They are defensible today only against the background of the very diversive climate of that time. I got rid of the Greater London Authority and the metro counties that I had only 10 years earlier helped to create. I am, however, proud of the serendipitous collection of decisions relating to Liverpool. I agreed to continue the special partnership that my predecessor, Peter Shaw, formed with the city. I selected the banks of the Mersey as the site for an urban development corporation. I awarded Liverpool the first garden festival to reclaim toxic land and turn it into attractive development opportunities. Peter Walker had created a derelict land grant mechanism a decade earlier to eradicate the coal tips and ore extraction blemishes scattered over the countryside. The task was largely completed. I used the grant to reclaim toxic urban sites for construction. Significantly, I made the grant conditional on the private sector partnerships contributing extra cash and developing the sites. Every pound of public money attracted private money. The concept of gearing entered the political vocabulary. Human relationships involved. In place of the dialogue of the deaf from opposing mountaintops, business people and officials became partners. enjoyed a drink together, developed friendships. I listed the Albert Dock, an iconic part of Liverpool heritage that was thus saved from demolition. In 1981, several of our inner cities witnessed serious riots. Amongst the worst of them was here in Toxteth. The maintenance of law and order is a fundamental of any conservative conviction. I backed the police as they restored it. I felt, however, a personal responsibility. The riots had happened on my watch. I thought I had begun a serious attempt to bring a new optimism to Liverpool. I sought the Prime Minister's agreement, instantly given, to leave the department routine to my very able colleagues, Tom King and John Stanley, whilst I was here. I held extensive meetings, talked to anyone with something to say, walked the streets, listened, and considered. My relationship with the city lasted until the end of 1982. It can be divided into 3 distinct phases. For 3 days, I listened. People were courteous but skeptical. You only came because of the riots. Well, that was self-evidently true, and I chose it as the title for my subsequent report to the Cabinet. There was one other clear impression. Everyone had their idea of who was responsible for the riots. It was always someone else. The ability to fund and make decisions lay in London, and even there was no coordination of responsibility. There was no powerful local leadership. The mood changed. Around day 4, people began to ask, what are you going to do? There was only one credible answer to that question, however, and it made a mockery of the concept of non-intervention associated with Mrs. Thatcher's government. I spent the next couple of weeks preparing a list of ideas that, with the right determination, resource, and above all, local support, could demonstrate a more optimistic destiny. The third phase lasted 18 months. The list was one thing, but who could turn it into action? I'm a practical man. Show me a problem, show me the person in charge. No one was in charge. The answer was to turn a centralist, London-based approach on its head. I created a task force drawn locally from the public and private sectors. Every Thursday, the team would report progress. Every Friday, I troubleshot the obstacles. We learned how to regenerate places. We learned that there was no short-term fix. Creating and developing ideas, the processes of planning and consultation, land acquisition and contract negotiation have to happen before boots hit the ground. The joker in the pack, and the Treasury's strongest card in opposing regeneration, is that it is often impossible to predict or cost its consequences. If I had predicted Canary Wharf, Excel, City Airport in London, or a major arena and conference centre, contemporary shopping centre in Liverpool, I'd have been locked up. The Development Corporation on the banks of the Mersey and its equivalent in London were my most important initiative in 1979. To understand why they succeeded, it is important to look at their structure. They had a chairman, a chief executive, and board-level representation of local state owners. They had planning powers, money to restore sites, improve infrastructure, and acquire land, all essential characteristics. They were thus able to reassure investors considering locating a new office, laboratory, or factory that was not going to be surrounded by sheds, or that their staff would be safe and enjoy good communications with their workplace. Such corporations transformed large parts of inner city Britain over the next 50 years. Regeneration is usually led by the public sector. It has the resources to make derelict land competitive with green fields. Partnerships with quangos, universities, government cultural and sporting programs have endless potential to work with the private sector to create wealth. Levelling up, however, will remain more slogan than policy until the government gives firm resource structure to its devolution agenda. Examples from my early Liverpool experiences demonstrate the philosophy. The preservation of the Albert Dock provided a home for the Tate of the North. The use of derelict land grant persuaded Plessy and British Rail to create Wavertree Industrial Park. The Housing Corporation unlocked the development of the Anglican Cathedral precinct. The Mersey Basin campaign was a major attack on urban pollution. The recent decision by the Metro Mayor Steve Rotherham to complete the job can make Liverpool a world leader in an increasingly global priority to raise the quality of urban water with huge environmental, leisure, tourist, sporting, and the job creation that will flow. In the early 1980s, Cantrell Farm was the despair of Knowsley Council. The Abbey National Building Society and Barclays Bank created the now flourishing Stockbridge Village Trust. Tate and Lyle site, abandoned by the company, was transferred to English estates. The Eldonians campaigned to renovate the area. In 1987, the project, incorporating then owner-occupied housing, won the Times RIBA Award as the most exciting example of community enterprise in the United Kingdom. A Merseyside Special Allocation Fund to enable this was spread over 3 years and deducted from the Housing Corporation budget. Pilkington's in St Helens was facing redundancies. Bill Humphreys set up an advisory service to help those losing their jobs. Step by step, this initiative led to the present local enterprise partnerships of today. The urban fringe is often characterized by rubbish dumped by uncaring citizens. Groundwork UK was conceived in St Helens using volunteers to clean things up. Today, it is a federation of charities mobilizing community action on poverty and the environment across the United Kingdom. In 1990, I returned to the Department of the Environment for the third time. 10 years before, I had been preoccupied with the need to reclaim derelict land. The conversion of Cantrell Farm into Stockbridge Village Trust gave me the confidence to tackle human tragedy of urban slums. City Challenge invited 30 local authorities to compete for one of only 10 packages of £35 million spread over 5 years to help them transform a slum estate. The idea of competition was highly controversial, but it was right. The losers learnt from the winners in the second round. There were conditions. The local authority had to attract private or other public funds to add to the original offer. The project had to have a chief executive and a project team. Most importantly, the stakeholders, such as head teachers, social workers, the police, and the tenants, had to be consulted. One of the winning sites was here in Liverpool, and I'm grateful to Max Steinberg for the opportunity to study the historic documents he kept from his involvement at the time. The area covered 144 hectares within the eastern sector of the city centre. It links the centre with Everton, Granby Toxteth and Cornwallis, with the campuses of the University, Polytechnic, now Liverpool John Moores University, City Community College, and the Oxford Street, Myrtle Street and Catherine Street hospitals. Some 4,000 people lived in the area, and there was a working population of 18,000. The project was timed for 5 years, and in 1997, the European Institute of Urban Affairs was asked to report on the outcomes. I quote its concluding paragraphs. Liverpool City Challenge has exceeded its original output practices in 18 of the 19 areas of activity. There was underperformance in the number of dwellings transferred to owner occupation due to limited progress in the Canning area. However, we achieved 23% more jobs were created than anticipated, 282 extra business startups, 14% more or improved business and commercial floor space, 35% more reclaimed land, 20% more apprentices, 29% more housing association dwellings, 105% more childcare places. The report concluded, and again I quote, "The achievements, whilst evidence of the success of the initiative, may also reflect the fact that targets were cautiously set initially to make them achievable. Nevertheless, taken as a set of indicators for the performance of Liverpool City Challenge, they certainly demonstrate significant success in delivering the plan." In Manchester, another city challenge was awarded. Richard Leese, leader of the City Council, described Hume City Challenge as the most important thing that has happened to Manchester in over 40 years. Virtually everything done since was with the skills, knowledge, and ideas acquired through the City Challenge process. Today, it is called Levelling Up. In a sense, even that slogan misleads. We're never going to create Mayfair in Middlesbrough. What we can do is to turn the vicious circle of decline, where the young leave, companies close, schools fail, and the land lies deserted, into virtuous circles of hope, where people stay, companies invest, and the environment attracts. We know how to do it. The evidence is irrefutable. What is missing is a government determined to do it. After the 2010 election, David Cameron invited me, together with Sir Terry Leahy, one of the city's most distinguished citizens, to revisit my 1981 report. It took a riot. The contrast was stark. Liverpool was full of people with ideas and energy. Our task was to recommend the best and propose a framework within which to turn them into action. Our report, Rebalancing Britain, Policy or Slogan, was published in October 2011 with our recommendations. A year later, I published another report for the Prime Minister, No Stone Unturned in Pursuit of Growth. Uniting both these reports was the theme to give form and substance to devolution by creating powerful mayors to lead the recovery of our cities. George Osborne as Chancellor and Greg Clark as the Minister responsible began the first serious move in that direction after the Blair government created a mayoralty in London in the year 2000. This is not a cry for more public expenditure, although I believe markets would take a more benign view of borrowing if it was for investment and not consumption. This is a cry to use existing public capital programs to attract private expenditure. It is a policy to save public expenditure by reducing over 300 local authorities closer to the 62 designed 50 years ago. Scotland and Wales abolished district authorities in the 1990s. In England, unitary counties, Wiltshire, Dorset, Shropshire, Buckinghamshire, for example, managed perfectly well without the waste and duplication created by two tiers. We need to extend the local leadership provided by directly elected mayors. The government should create, in addition, the central pot of capital expenditure introduced by George Osborne and distribute long-term funds after consultation to local partnerships depending on the quality of their plans, reflecting the opportunities and problems in their very different locations. We need to engage the remarkable reservoir of goodwill and cooperation that the COVID crisis revealed to be not far below the surface of our society. It was a single honor for me to receive the freedom of this city in 2012. In looking forward then, I concluded, Liverpool is reasserting its place as a city recognized across a shrinking world as a place of culture, a font of enterprise, proud of itself, ambitious for its future. Liverpudlians have done this. Liverpudlians will build on this. You must be clear. Because you did, you can. I will not change a word tonight. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Is Lord Heseltine's microphone working?
Yeah, seems they can.
Can you hear me? Yes? I don't want to use it. Can you hear me? What could go wrong? Look, Michael, thank you. That was an absolutely fascinating tour d'horizon of the crucial issues facing the country, partly reflected through the prism of Liverpool: Brexit, devolution, mayors, the role of business and partnership, the importance of leadership. I'd like to develop some of those themes with you, and I'm going to call on some of my colleagues in the audience to raise some of those questions. I have one or two thoughts myself, but I think since you started with Brexit, we might want to take a question on Brexit. I think, is John Flamson present? John, can you give the microphone to John Flamson, who's been mentioned already? Should I say, before he starts, I was delighted to hear Michael Heseltine quoting the very important report of the European Institute of Urban Affairs, because I wrote it. Actually, what's much more important, the City Challenge Initiative, which was so successful. The gentleman is about to talk now. John Flamson was our chief executive, and I think we now sit in what is called the Knowledge Quarter, partly because of all the work that John Flamson and his colleagues did in City Challenge. But anyway, John, that's enough flattery. Ask your question, please.
Just carry on, Michael. Yeah, all his good lines, by the way, he's stolen from me over the years. But Lord Heseltine, you heard from the applause there what people feel about you, and also, I think, what they will have thought was a magisterial oversight of the whole I suppose, condition that the UK is in now. Thank you personally for my career. I was Chief Planner of Merseyside Development Corporation, as well as Chief Exec at Liverpool City Challenge. And then when I was a director of the University of Liverpool, I helped to establish the Heseltine Institute. So thank you very much for my career. Much appreciated. My question is about Europe. And of course, I've been heavily involved as a senior civil servant in investing 1.3 billion euros of the European program. People in this area have seen the importance of the European Union and actually voted by majority to remain in the European Union. You gave a great case for the prosecution, and you also outlined a number of practical steps that could be taken to improve our relationship with the EU. My question to you is, in addition to those, would you support a campaign for the UK to rejoin the European Union And if so, who do you think would be best placed to spearhead that campaign?
Well, look, I ask you a very simple question. What the hell do you think I was doing?
Yeah. I hope you... Are you prepared to say that this is the beginning of the campaign to rejoin the European Union?
No,
if
I'm
not yourself, who would you think?
I'm not prepared to say that, because I said it in 3 days after the referendum in 2016. I wrote an article in the Mail on Sunday saying the fight back starts here. So I've been banging on about this ever since. But of course, there was a very considerable feeling, it's done. Get Brexit done, stop yammering on, all that stuff. Well, in other words, the innate British sense of fairness, let's see, give them a chance. And every day, the chance becomes more obvious as today, what have you got in the papers today? You've got the minister who negotiated the Australian deal saying it's not good for Britain. You've got Paris taking over the lead of the stock exchange from London. That's just today. And these have been the newspapers which are completely obsessed by Brexit, I managed to find some quotations which I find very exciting in the Telegraph group, but it's very difficult to get something into these newspapers that is against the overall policy which created the mess in the first place. But what is, all the things I said were some small steps in the direction. What is needed is the voice of all those who know what a lot of rubbish it was, what a deception it was. And so many people are now sort of saying, well, can we, it's all a bit much, isn't it too late? It's never too late. This is democracy. And it's only when people start leading and arguing and shouting that you get results. So, but you then ask the key and killer question, look, approaching the years of 90 years of age, it's too much, too late, too late. And, but I'll keep at it, don't worry.
Do keep at it, do keep keeping on. Brilliant. Can I ask something about your thoughts on constitution, devolution, centralisation of power, all of which was implicit and well spelled out there? Two questions. One is looking back. I think the most important is look forward. Why do you think we are so centralised in this country, and what are the costs we paid? And after that, I would like to ask you what we're going to do about it next. So just on why are we so centralised, and really what price have we paid as a consequence?
Well, you can't cost the answer to the question. We don't know. If we had been more locally inspired and led, you cannot tell what would have happened. I believe profoundly, from my experience, starting here particularly, that it would have transformed this country. And every other capitalist economy I know of, and they're all there, all have devolved bases. You've got the Lander in France, the Lander in Germany, Department in France, the mayors in America, senators in America. Wherever you look, you have got discrete economies led locally by people who are directly elected. And to me, that's crucially important. I think, well, I'll tell you a story which shocked me, absolutely shook me. So when I was doing what I was doing here, a member of my party said to me, what are you spending all that time in Liverpool for? There's no votes there. And I really was, appalled. But there were people who think like that. And the party political machine can often think like that. And one of the problems about the present divide of the party political machine is that if the Conservatives run a local authority, they probably need 60% of the area to win. And they're pretty sure where that 60% is. So the other 40, 20, 30, well, there are no votes there, are there? turn it on its head. If your Labour wins, often with a very different philosophy, they can win with 60%, and they all basically are not keen on the private sector. They want more money to subsidize this, that, or the other. Now, I'm parodying the political situation, but the point I'm making, that in the present practice of our local government, it's too easy for one of the more extreme elements of party politics to behave in a way which does not create the community of self-interest, which, when I've seen it works dramatically better. Because, I mean, I think I can say, there's no one who's worked more closely with Labour authorities than I have. And if the truth be told, behind closed doors, we don't really have any arguments. It's only when you get out on the platforms, we have to appeal to the more extreme of one party or another, that you go and say some of the more extreme things you do and one of the more simplistic things you do. And I tried to address some of this. You know, the role of the public and private sector. How many times do I have to read in Tory-type newspapers about bloody civil servants clogging up the machine? Well, it was civil servants who helped to regenerate Liverpool in the 1980s with me. And I could go on and on about the remarkable things they did. If there's a failure of the civil service, it's not the civil service, it's the minister who hasn't the first idea what he wants to do or how to do it. And I defend civil servants absolutely. So we have a machine which is polarized. But if you were to go to mayors, then it's a different story, because they have to be directly elected and they will embrace the wider horizon. And that means that they'll start bringing in representative stakeholders of the wider horizon. And if the central government uses its capital programs in order to frankly, distinguish between well-run authorities and not so well-run authorities, allocating to where the private sector has been brought in to add to public money, then that will send a signal. And very rapidly you will find that local authority one, run by either of the two political parties, start reflecting their policies to earn that money.
Brilliant. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned elected mayors, because we're very fortunate we have in this city, and indeed in this room, two directly elected mayors, Mayor Joanne Anderson and Mayor Steve Rotherham, and you paid homage to one of them already. Steve or Joanne, would you like to make a point, ask a question of Lord Heseltine? Can I have a microphone in the front, please?
Thanks, Michael. Another very thought-provoking contribution. I've been with you on many occasions when I've heard some of that teased out. And you've spent enough time in Liverpool to know that when we see something that's chaotic or shambolic or a mess, we say the state of that. So on the heading, I'm reading that as the state of the nation, ! Because of what's happened. And you would think that the likes of myself and Joanne would derive some schadenfreude from what's going on in Whitehall and Westminster. But actually, the paralysis is creating real problems for us. So simple things like memorandum of understanding, we can't get them signed off because we've only got secretaries of state who last the tomato season. And we need some stability, at least some continuity. We're talking to people that we know won't be in jobs in a few weeks' time. And that's no way to run a government. Now, in 2019, I think it was, you launched a report on empowering cities and city regions and talked about devolution. And I think there were a number of recommendations, perhaps 18 and 19 different recommendations in that, which would free up the ability of local areas to do things more nimbly for themselves than a monolith like a central government could do for us. Do you just want to tease out some of those things that you thought were really important to us, because they haven't happened, and I think that it is important today as they were the 3 or 4 years ago when you put that report together?
Steve, that's absolutely brilliant, because I've got a list here of all the things that Michael said in that report. I was going to mention them. Let me read them out, what he said, and then you can reflect upon it.
Well, of course, you're right about the report, and it was, if I remember, it was done in conjunction with most of the local mayors, who I think you were all listed in it, and your proposals were listed, and your successes were listed. And look, of course, you and I can never agree because we've got constituencies on the other side of the political room. We've got to be enemies. So I have immediately to say I disagree with Steve, and we're not friends, and we're not, all that sort of rubbish. Just so that the quotations which are here can be piled off to the people who want to believe that rubbish. They know. I mean, ministers are usually quite kind in talking to me, and I bang on and I tell them. But the pressures are just against, and they are fascinating, the pressures, because what you're looking at. Well, you were there, so you know about the pressures the other side. Why should anyone who's got power in Whitehall devolve it? Why should they? Now, here we have every conceivable reason, because it would help and improve and all that. But that's not quite the way they see it. And you can go through why does the Treasury want to devolve power? God, local government is bad enough trying to control central government without that lot taking over. So, no. Your Secretary of State for one of the great baronies, Prime Minister rings up and says, Mike, I'm thinking of sharing your power with all those wonderful people in local government. What? My power? So you then come to the local councillors. Now, why shouldn't they want mayors? Well, of course, the mayor is going to be a lot more important than them. Why shouldn't a member of parliament want mayors? Well, who is this guy? I'm a member of parliament here. This guy's going to represent 10 constituencies. He's going to start telling me what I should be saying. So, look, turkeys don't vote for Christmas. I mean, and don't be too cynical, because none of you will vote for Christmas if you were a turkey. That's the truth of it. Human nature is it's not rocket science. It's all blindingly obvious. And you want the ultimate cynicism. The new member of parliament, having won this fantastic majority in some local constituency. I will fight for you. I will be your friend. I will be there. You tell me what you want. I'm on your side. First day, he's asked to see the chief whip. Dear Mike, we've been so longing to see you here in Westminster. You're one of the brightest of the young candidates coming up the ladder, and we're here to help you step by step up the ladder of government preferment. We know you'll be loyal. We know we can rely on you in those difficult moments which every government faces. Can't we? Oh, yes, of course. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas. So, look, I am so passionately opposed to what's going on. I know what devolution should be like. I know how to do it. I've done it. I've worked with local authorities. And I know so many people, I think I can say, when I did the first report of this sort, which was for David Cameron as leader of the opposition, I did a report on local government, and the chairman of the County Councils Association was on the policy group, Tory leader from one of the big urban counties, and we recommended mayors, and he left the group and said, I know you're right, but I can't say it. That's why my own view that Cameron, Osborne, Greg Clark represented a moment when it could happen. But they were fighting they weren't fighting the Labour Party, they were fighting the Tory Party. And it would be exactly the same with the Labour Party. Only Blair has got London to his credit. The Tories have made more progress than that. But as I said, I got rid of the metropolitan counties in 1981. And it was here in Liverpool, I'll never forget it. There was this metro county, and I was having an interview with the chief executive.
Ray O'Brien.
Who?
Ray O'Brien.
Correct. And I said to him something to the effect of, what are you thinking of doing about X or Y? To which I remember his reply, he said, we have not yet identified a role. And this was the Thatcher government. This was a new, I thought, my God, they're looking round for things to do, Ouch. And so I got rid of them. It was a terrible mistake. But, you can only explain it against the winter of discontent, and some of you will remember a lot of that here. It was tough times, and that's my only excuse. Not much of an excuse, really.
We'll let you off. Just before we move on from that, I do want to say the Empowering English Cities, which Steve referred to, is a classic architecture of what we would need to make it work. A new Department of Devolution with more responsibilities, a cabinet committee, a select committee to follow it, regional government offices tied in with combined authorities, and greater powers, resource and responsibilities to local government. It's very simple, it's there, and my problem is I don't quite know how we don't get there, but never mind. Bill Addy, are you in the audience, Bill? Yes, you are. Lord Heseltine talked about leadership and private sector and all that. You're chief executive of the Business Investment Development Company. Business Improvement District, excuse me. Bill, a question, please. And Mayor Joanne, if you want to come back, please do.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Lord Heseltine. First of all, if I could join in the sort of feeling in the room that John Flamson echoed about, thank you for the career that you enabled me with. I started my own career as a building surveyor for the local authority back in the late 70s, working on those interwar housing estates and bringing regeneration back, and taking it through as a private sector contractor and developer through City Challenge, indeed in Bootle and Liverpool, and then, of course, having the privilege to work alongside Chris Farrow at Merseyside Development Corporation as we brought the Crown Plaza and kick-started the Princess Dock development back in those days. But my real question was about, you mentioned very much about private sector and public sector working together, how important it was that the private sector and public sector should be together. You also finished your lecture by mentioning the fact that we're Liverpool. We can, I think if I paraphrase you, we've done it and we can do it again. It was a question to you around about leadership. Is where should the leadership come if we want to see the city really thrive, if we want to see our academic institutions, our private sector and our public sector working together to drive the city forward into the next decades and onwards? Where do you believe that leadership can come from? And do you think we already have that in place?
Well, the leadership here at the city level is in the hands of an elected mayor, and the leadership in the conurbation is in the hands of another elected mayor. And I was deeply involved in the processes of making all that happen when I worked for the government as a sort of special advisor 10 years ago. I believe it was a huge advance. I apologize to no one for my admiration for what Joe Anderson did as mayor of the city. I'm not commenting on what has happened subsequently, about which I know very little. But I know that the change that came about because there was a directly elected mayor, and the potential for that is, just so obvious. Now, I realize there's a controversy, and you won't be surprised. My views about that controversy is that it's a self-inflicted wound. But this is democracy. People do what they want. So I've got absolutely no doubt that the present structure as it exists today in Liverpool and Merseyside is a very good one. If you say to me, is the government making it work? Well, you've heard my views. They're not. But they should. And to do that, the first change, if this was, if the Prime Minister was sitting here today and he said to me, what should I do now? I'd say you must change the structure of government. You must do two things. You must create a committee under your devolution minister of the relevant spending departments. You must pool their capital budgets so that you're looking at the ability of local people to bid for funds as they think they need to spend them, as opposed to Whitehall hypothecating the function. And you must create local offices of government with the same coordinating effect, so that people like Steve who want to find out something can ring to the local regional office and have one conversation, as opposed to making 9 phone calls to Whitehall. And those are what the central government should do. But I have no doubt at all that local mayors would respond to that, because I know most of them, and I've worked with them, and I know how the system can be made to work, and so do they. So the big failure is the central government failure.
Thank you. Mayor Joanne, do you want to have a comment upon this? Can I have the microphone to Mayor Anderson, please?
Thank you. I sit here today with a report that's about to go out tomorrow with a £73 million budget gap for the city. You know us as people, you know that we're entrepreneurial, we're creative, that we've got something about us that gets things done, like you said in your speech about City Challenge. But it feels really difficult when we've lost over £500 million in the last 12 years from central government funding, and each household has lost nearly £1,100. So some of the remedies that the government are talking about are increasing council tax, but of course our council taxes in the majority of Band A and Band B, you know, a percentage increase might lead to £1 million here, where it leads to £7 million somewhere else. So it feels like every time you get ahead, this current crisis that we're facing around cost of living and energy, and the way, you know, Liz's Truss government behaved in terms of playing with the economy. I just wanted your thoughts on terms of, you know, we're at the end of the road in terms of making cuts in local government. We've got a crisis in adult social care. Where are we going with this government when it comes to resourcing our local authorities? It feels like you're trying to climb a ladder with a step on your head at times. So I just wanted your thoughts on that, Lord Heseltine.
Well, let me say, do I understand the question? This is about the shortage of cash on the revenue accounts, basically, local government, yeah.
Huge fiscal blackout.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in a mess, full stop. And the easy thing is for me to say, and I'm certainly not going to say it, is for government to pay more money. Because to do that, they'll have to borrow more money, and that will put up the interest rates and all the consequences which will flow. I'm on on Thursday, the government's going to have to take some terrible decisions. There's no question about that, and not one word from me will undermine what in fact is the viability of the national economy. You've got a big problem. You have, but so's everybody else, and we have to pay the bills. It's not going to be easy.
Thank you. It's honest, if not very cheerful. Thank you very much. Colin Sinclair, who's chief...
And I ought to just say, you won't like this, there is no way that your party will get elected unless it follows the same route. Not that I advise you on how to get elected, you'll understand.
No, we're coming to the end of our session, but Colin Sinclair is Chief Exec of Knowledge Quarter and Science Tech Liverpool, and at the heart of the Knowledge Quarter in which we sit. Colin, please.
Lord Heseltine, it's quite a tough place, isn't it, the state of the nation? And as Mayor Joanne said, it's a pretty tough time for Liverpool as well to deliver essential services. Now, as Michael knows, I'm always an optimist, and I think in every crisis there is opportunity. And as Steve has said as Mayor as well, the people of Liverpool are so inventive, and there is so much innovation here. So I'd list things like health and life sciences, materials chemistry, advanced manufacturing as the things that could create the opportunity. With all your experience and expertise, where do you see the opportunity for the UK and for Liverpool?
Well, you've got to rejoin the European Union first. You know, we've just cut ourselves off. I mean, it's madness. But again, well, I have the privilege of having a business which I helped to create, and the world is full of opportunities. I mean, I talk to the chief executive every week, and I say to them, because I don't want to intervene, I said, look, I don't want to run the company anymore. I want to share the excitements. And that's what I do. I get a sort of my kick every Friday when he tells me what's going on. But it's impossible for me to itemize the individual opportunities. You've either got entrepreneurs or you haven't. And if you've got entrepreneurs, they'll find the opportunities. But they're there. And I mean, just the internet is absolutely phenomenal. The growth of podcasts, which happens almost overnight. Everybody's got a podcast, you know, and people make fortunes out of these things. But I've always been like you on the side. If I said to Anne years and years ago, if Haymarket had gone pear-shaped at any stage, we'd have done one of two things. We'd have either got a pub, and she'd have done the cooking, and I'd have done the bar, because I saw people make money out of doing that. Or if the worst comes to worst, we'd have got a barrow, and we would have gone from place to place, buying at one stage and selling at another, because we know a bit about antiques and we like those sort of things. So, you know, I come from an entrepreneurial background. My grandfather was entrepreneurial and all that sort of thing. But you can't tell people how to be an entrepreneur. They're there. What you can do, and this is actually rather important, you can educate them so that they understand what's going on. They can articulate what's going on. They have the skills. And that, I mean, one of the things I feel very strongly about is failing schools. And look, there's only one answer to failing schools. Change the head teacher. And that's what so few people are prepared to do. If you're a brilliant classroom teacher, there is absolutely no guarantee that moving to managing 1,000 kids is the same skill as teaching 30 in a room. So if they can't do it, it's no disgrace to say, look, it's not been a great success, you're going back to the classroom, to which you are brilliant. But the consequences of failing schools, and, you know, there's a terrible, the Ofsted reports about some of the attitudes of some local authorities to these failing schools. There is no socio-economic grouping which is self-defined as failing. The only thing that is failing is the people running the school.
Wow. Lord Heseltine, we've come to the end of our allotted hour. You mentioned your wife. When I was worrying about this and saying to my wife, Fran, how will it go? What questions will I ask? How it will go? Well, it's been absolutely brilliant, so thank you very, very much for that. I want to thank the audience for coming. It's been a huge turnout. As Professor Fiona Beveridge said, we're delighted that you're here in such numbers to support the Heseltine Institute, the University of Liverpool, in the Tung Auditorium. None of these things are successful unless you have an awful lot of hard-working people at the back of a big event like this. So can I thank Joe Hayes from the Heseltine Institute, Sean Winston and Margaret from the corporate events, and Emma Arnold from the Tung team. But mainly, can I say it's been a privilege to work in your field. It's a privilege to meet you. And I know the audience feels privileged, so can we please,
Michael,
once again...
How many people would like to rejoin the European Union?
I'm going to give him the microphone.
That was worth coming. Absolutely incredible. Incredible. Amazing. Amazing. Thanks so much. Very good.
Thank you, and do remember there is such a thing as a free drink. There is a reception in the atrium. Please join us there. Thanks again.